In this course, we will examine a period of European history that is sometimes designated as the Dark Ages. Our focus will be on the 7 centuries between 300 and 1000, a period most unlike the 1000 years that would follow. Our period is dominated by the history of two empires, the Roman and the Carolingian, rather than by the history of the independent kingdoms or nation states. It is a period when the massive movement of ethnic groups involving hundreds of thousands of individuals sweeping across Europe was nearly a routine event. It is a period when Europe is buffeted time and time again by external invaders, from the Huns to the Arabs to the Vikings. Many aspects of life at this time will appear strange to you. None of us is a serf, vassal, or lord. None of us is a stylite, living atop tall poles. For 20 or 30 years at a time, none of us has undergone trial by ordeal, whereby we prove our case by plunging a hand into a cauldron of boiling water as we try to pick up a pebble resting at the bottom. Odd as this world may seem at times, it is a world that is recognizably becoming our own, and we should not unquestionably accept the label of the Dark Ages. In countless ways, seemingly obscure events and developments from the Dark Ages impinge on the lives of people today. This is true in the realm of religion, because our period saw the triumph of Christianity over paganism. This is true in the realm of language, because every word that we speak and write, indeed the handwriting that we use each and every day, is a product of the historical forces that we will study. This is true in the realm of family life, because many practices that existed in 300, such as polygyny, marriage within the kin group, and infanticide, are illegal today, are vanished or completely gone by the year 1000. This course will attempt to strike a balance between the difference in similarity, recognizing what this period bequeathed and failed to bequeath to the present. The course is divided into two sections. The first half will cover the period between circa 300 and circa 650, which historians sometimes call the world of late antiquity. Late antiquity is a period that saw the political collapse of the western half of the Roman Empire and the official acceptance of Christianity by Europe's rulers. Late antiquity is still in many ways part of the ancient world, but the ancient world is changing into the medieval world. The transformation of the ancient into the medieval was highly complex. Our goal will be to trace the history of the transformation and to explain why it happened at all. The second half of the course will deal with the period from circa 650 to circa 1000, or the early Middle Ages proper, with the ancient world gone. Europe developed new political orientations, new military technologies, new cultural forms, new social categories, among many other things. The second half of the course will highlight not only those developments that separated the early Middle Ages from the ancient world, but also those that would be crucial in determining Europe's future identity and development. This course is at an immediate academic level. You will soon perceive not everything that has been said that could not have been said about it. For example, the birth of Islam. Those with an interest in any such topic should regard the lectures at a point from which they can launch their own in-depth explorations. Nonetheless, the lectures are more detailed and more involved in is the case in an introductory survey. Lecture 1, Long Shadows and the Dark Ages. Scope. Compared to the High and Late Middle Ages, 1000 to 1500, the early Middle Ages and the world of late antiquity that preceded it are relatively little studied fields. There is no accident. Surviving documentation from the period 300 to 1000 is sparse. Furthermore, the period from 300 to 1000 has also been categorized as European Dark Ages, a period in which economic and intellectual activity waned. While violent barbarians destroyed the monuments of classical civilization, the period's dismal reputation has done little to recommend it to scholars. Yet this same period has attracted the attention of some of the greatest and most influential historians ever to have lived, such as Edward Gibbon and Henry Perrine. It continues to attract attention, in part because the questions of why the Romans fell and why Christianity replaced paganism as a dominant European religion are among the most important controversial historical questions ever to have been posed. An outline. To the extent that any part of the Middle Ages is still regarded as the Dark Ages, it is a period from 300 to 1000 AD, or some subperiod thereof. The period from 300 to 1000 is the least studied portion of the Middle Ages. Not coincidentally, it's also the most poorly documented portion of the Middle Ages, bequeathing to modern historians relatively little source material with which to work. Its darkness is sometimes interpreted as more than mere obscurity, however. Many historians have depicted the era as an age of civilizational collapse, brought about by the fall of the Roman Empire. Despite its grim reputation, the period from 300 to 1000 merits consideration for a number of reasons. This period poses us with some of the most challenging questions ever to face historians, such as, why did the Roman Empire fall and the ancient world gave way to the medieval? Many of the most important figures associated with the Middle Ages, such as Augustine of Hippo, Arthur, and Charlemagne, lived between 300 and 1000. Subsequent medieval developments were to some extent based on the foundations established during this period. Two historians have especially influenced our understanding of the collapse of the Roman Empire and the transition from the ancient to the medieval world. One is the Englishman Edward Gibbon, died 1794. Edward Gibbon was a well-off English Protestant and an important participant in the 18th century Enlightenment. His explanation of the fall of the Roman Empire very much reflected his own personal circumstances, especially as regards to his hostility to revealed religions. Gibbon's magistral Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire was published in 6 volumes between 1776 and 1787. This extraordinarily well-written book claimed that the collapse of the Roman Empire was the result of Christianity, which sapped Romans of their civic virtue. Overly concerned with otherworldly salvation, Romans could no longer muster the will to repel invasions by Germanic barbarians during the 4th and 5th centuries. Gibbon's legacy to subsequent generations of historians was his placement of the fall of the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries, his contempt for the period after that fall, and his tendency to see moral failings as the main cause of that fall. The other historians whose ideas have decisively shaped the study of the period between 300 to 1000 is the Belgian Henry Perrine, died in 1935. Perrine injected a new emphasis on social and especially economic concerns into the study of late Roman and early medieval history. In this, he was greatly influenced by the ideas of Karl Lamprecht, who challenged his contemporaries' emphasis on political, military, and biological history. Lamprecht called on historians to de-emphasize the individual and emphasize the collective. According to Perrine, The barbarian invasions of the 4th and 5th centuries did not result in the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman economy and Roman civilization built on that economy remained strong until the 7th century. Then the Arab conquests of North Africa and Spain destroyed the economic unity of the Mediterranean world, isolating Europe and forcing it back on its own resources. Much of Perrine's case was built on the disappearance of certain items and practices from Christian Europe, north of the Alps during the 7th century, including papyrus and the minting of gold coins. This course will argue that the period from 300 to 1000 can best be understood as consisting of two different subperiods: late antiquity, lasting roughly until the middle of the 7th century, and the early Middle Ages proper, stretching from the middle of the 7th century to the late 10th century. Late antiquity is a transitional period during which the ancient world slid slowly into the medieval, and elements of classical culture coexisted with phenomena that augured the coming of the Middle Ages. During the early Middle Ages, Europe's center of gravity moved northward thanks to the emergence of the Carolingian Empire, which spread across much of continental Europe and disseminated many distinctly medieval institutions and practices. Questions to consider. Does the concept of the Dark Ages retain any analytical and descriptive value, or is it too loaded with negative connotations to merit any place in the modern study of medieval history? Edward Gibbons and Henry Perrine approached late Roman and early medieval history somewhat differently. Does this shift in tone and emphasis reflect progress in historical methods and understanding? Is history a field that progresses generation by generation? Does it decline? Does each generation of historians respond to its environment, writing history that is neither better nor worse than what came before, but merely different?